Hi lovely landlords, and Nikki from Nikki Homes here today, and I just wanted to talk to you regarding the changes. Now you probably saw my previous message of the day that I was going to run through the 4 major changes that we're aware of that are happening this year in the lettings industry. Now I just want to reiterate that's not all the changes that are going to come into play, it's just some of them that we've got coming at us now, and I just wanted to explain in a little bit more detail what these changes mean for you, whether you have a managed property or a non-managed property. Remember, at the end of the day, even if you have a letting agent employed, the scary thing that you need to always remember about your asset is that the letting agent is actually liable for nothing except for the right to rent checks. So it's really important to make sure that your letting agent is managing your asset properly and make sure that they're aware of the changes that are coming into play. If they haven't already told you about them, I would be questioning to make sure that they are competent and are doing your job correctly, because remember, the other scary, terrifying thing is if it's not done properly, you can lose your asset. So now we've had most of the bad news over and done with, let's move forward to hopefully some of the better news, or explaining the news that's coming. So first of all, let's talk about Section 21. So Section 21 notices, if nobody is aware, they are what you would normally use if you need to go down an eviction process for a tenant. Now there's 2 general eviction processes, which is Section 21s and Section 8s, which only can be used on rent arrears or clauses and tenancies, but they're a bit more complicated and we're not going to go into that this evening because I'll be here forever. But Section 21 notices is the most commonly used notice. You don't have to give a reason why, you just issue a notice period. Now the problem with Section 21s at the moment is that there used to be a 2-month notice period. So you'd give 2 months notice to your tenants to vacate the property, and most of the tenants would leave. Otherwise you'd go through the court process, etc. The difficulty we have now is that that 2-month notice period has gone from 2 months to 6 months. So it's had a massive knock-on effect, meaning you either end up with a 6-month notice, a 10-month notice, or a 16-month notice for your tenancy. So where does that come from? How to work that out? Basically, you can't give notice on a fixed term until 2 months into the tenancy. So until 4 months into the tenancy, so 2 months. Basically, you can't give notice on a fixed term until it's 2 months towards the end of the tenancy. So 2 months before the tenancy ends, then you can serve your notice. And notice at the moment is 6 months. So therefore, your notice period, if you are doing a new fixed term, which I'm not advising landlords at the moment to do, because unless you know how safe your tenant is, do you want to sign into a new fixed term where you may not be able to evict them and you end up in a situation of rent arrears for 6, 10 or 16 months? No. So I'd say don't extend a new fixed term unless you absolutely need to. I would try and keep them on a rolling contract. So your notice period then would go from 2 months to 6 months, 10 months or 16 months. And the problem is, as I said, if they've got rent arrears, going down the eviction process is not going to be simple, and I'll explain that why in a second. So that's your options with Section 21 notice. It doesn't look like it's coming to an end anytime soon. I know a lot of agents push landlords to do a new fixed term contract because they make extra money out of it, because they can charge you a new tenancy setup fee. We are landlord led, not letting agent led, so I'm not into charging new tenant fees and making money. I'm into protecting your assets. Would I do a new fixed term on one of our own rental properties right now? No. Not unless it's an amazing tenant I've had for years that I know their job is 100% secure. I wouldn't even risk it. So personally, don't go down that route. Secondly, moving on to our other issue as such, is something called breathing space. Now the government announced last week, which is the reason why I say it's not going to be easy to evict under a Section 8. The government announced last week they're going to be introducing something called breathing space. Now, breathing space is in the financial sector. It's going to allow people that are in debt, that are struggling to pay credit cards or financial issues off, some breathing space. So they could be issued a notice, basically, in effect. It's not all been clarified yet, just bear this in mind because it's still going through the court process. But the breathing space will mean that if a tenant is also in rent arrears and they can't afford to pay you have to give them breathing space, and you have to back off. You can get a issue from the local council that will tell you to back off and leave them. They are in a financial situation and they need breathing space. Now, unfortunately, hopefully, if you've got a mortgage to pay and you're not living purely on your rental income, the mortgage companies might also affect this if we do end up in a situation like this with a tenant, because otherwise, if the tenant gets breathing space and you don't get a mortgage payment breathing space, it's going to be very tricky because you can't serve a Section 8 to reclaim your possession. It'll be interesting. I don't know how it's going to work. It is going through at the moment, but that's something you just need to be cautious of again. Hence why, going back to the notice, going back to Section 21, going back to new fixed term contracts, I wouldn't advise you to go down a new fixed contract route at the moment. Thirdly, another thing that's changing this year is, with all the chaos of COVID, I think everyone's kind of a little bit forgotten that we actually have left the EU. So the EU is gone, we are no more. It does mean changes to right to rent checks. So you need to be cautious of that. They're not changing till the middle of the year, however, so don't panic right now. Right to rent checks will be changing in the middle of the year. I will bring you another update so you can be aware of this, of what changes are coming into play. Don't forget, if you do have a tenant that is on a visa, that you must continue to still get a copy of their visa as well, and make sure your expiry dates. Do not forget that a failed right to rent check does carry a prison sentence. So if you do not have your right to rent check done properly, or you have not carried on your right to rent check, or your letting agent has not done your right to rent check, remember that it does carry a prison sentence with it. So it's not something to be messing around with. So I will again discuss that in more detail as we get nearer to the middle of the year, and they have clarified how the new law is going to work for European tenants that are currently in situ, or European tenants that are coming into tenancies. And fourthly, the last final thing that I have to update you on, or remind you on at the moment, is electrical safety checks. Now, obviously, electrical safety checks did come into play last year. If you had a renewed tenancy, please tell me you got an electrical safety check done before your tenancy renewed. If you had a new tenancy from last year, you needed to have an electrical safety check as well. And then current tenancies that are on contractual periodic or statutory periodic rolling, or getting renewed after the 30th, must also be done by the 31st of March now. So you've got to the 31st of March for existing tenancies that aren't having renewal but are having statutory periodic or contractual periodic tenancy. They will be due to have your electrical safety check as well. You need to have one in place by the 31st of March. So make sure you get your electrical safety check done. It may mean changing a fuse board. We have found quite a few of those come up. The other thing you need to remember with electrical safety checks is you have 14 days from getting it done to getting the work done. And you must remember that you must give your failed electrical safety check to the council, who will then give you 14 days to rectify it. And then you must notify the council as well whenever those 14 days have been done and that check has been resolved and the issues have been resolved, to get that electrical safety through. Again, not something to mess around with. Fines are thousands. I think it's about £12,000 they're going to be fining, and obviously you do have that unfortunate option of a manslaughter charge as well if you don't get your electrical safety certificate done and it's found there's a fire or an incident caused by an electrical safety fault. Now, electrical safety checks, one of the biggest questions I think we have asked in the electrical safety checks are, is appliances included, and is PAT testing included? So currently there are no regulations to have appliances PAT tested in a property. However, you do have a duty of care to ensure that any appliances supplied by yourself, white goods in particular, are safe for the tenant's use. And if they're not safe for the tenant's use and they jeopardise the safety of the tenant, then it's very serious, and again you can chase criminal charges. So you need to be wary of that, and that hasn't changed. That's always been in play. They are looking at bringing PAT testing in. There's talks on that possibly later this year, but at the moment, no, your electrical safety check is regarding the wiring of the property, the fuse boards, etc., not to do with PAT testing or the appliances, and won't apply to the appliances. I said we'll go down the PAT testing route possibly later in the year, and we can discuss that in more detail. Now, also the final thing I would just remind you on the electrical safety checks, which I did cover very briefly there for a second, was about statutory periodic and contractual periodic tenancies. When you have a tenancy, you have three types of tenancy, which is your fixed term tenancy, which you always start at. Then you have contractual periodic and statutory periodic. Now, contractual periodic means that you do not create a new tenancy whenever you go from your fixed term into your rolling tenancy. But statutory periodic, you do create a new tenancy, and therefore, in the eyes of the law, is considered a new tenancy. So if you have a tenant that goes into a statutory periodic, not contractual periodic tenancy, after the electrical safety regulations last year, even if it's before the 31st of March, you still need an electrical safety certificate in play beforehand when it goes into that statutory periodic tenancy, because you've created a new tenancy in the eyes of the law, and therefore you won't ever be able to serve a Section 21 notice or an eviction notice or a Section 8 if you don't or haven't issued all your documentation again, and also issued that electrical safety certificate. So something to be really, really cautious of. Guys, we have enough stress going on in the world right now. I don't think anybody needs any more added stress by losing their rental property because documents weren't issued correctly when it changed legally from one type of tenancy to another, or because nobody paid attention at the beginning of a tenancy to make sure they'd done the issuing of the documentation correctly. So don't mess around with stuff, guys. The law is getting tougher out there. Property is still amazing. It's still such a rewarding industry to be in. It's still brilliant in regards to assets. You've got a pension fund for your future. You have got an asset that's got capital growth and yield on it. So it's really a great thing to have. I do believe in Roosevelt's saying, the safest thing in the world. Property is one of the safest things in the world. But if you manage it with due care and attention, it is, can't be lost or stolen or carried away. And it's true, it can't be. So just make sure that you don't do anything silly to cause yourself to lose repossession of that property. I will be updating you again throughout the year as the legislation changes and we get more and more bits. But obviously, if anybody needs any help, advice or guidance, I'm always on the other end of the phone or on email below. So please drop me over a message. But otherwise, please everyone, stay safe, stay at home, and make sure you protect your assets. See you later. Bye.